welcome back to OT of the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. My name is, of course, Felix Schultz, and I am with...
none other than Andy Green. Felix, today we have Simon Woody Wood from Sneaker Freaker joining us for a pretty epic chat. We talk about all things sneakers, watches, hype, and publishing.
Yeah, it's great. No holds barred chat about shoes, and I get some advice on dad sneakers. Before that,
Amazing.
what have you been up to, Andy Green?
Oh, finally. All right. So I've been itching to tell you about this. I watched a film called I Care a Lot. It's got Rosamund Pike starring. It's sort of a thriller comedy with a really strong cast, actually. I think Peter Dinklage, Diane Weist, and Isa Gonzalez. So the cast is actually awesome because it's strong and female, but it is a suspenseful film.
Happy movie?
Hey, it's got a really it's quite satisfying in the end. It's long. You're on edge for most of it. Basically, I guess the pitch is Rosamund Pike has a elaborate scheme to put people into nursing homes and then I guess pillage their estates as their
all
carer.
legally.
And she's got quite a good thing going.
Nice.
Until she puts the wrong person in.
Dun, dun, dun.
But yeah, really, really highly recommend. I think I found it on Amazon.
Yeah, I think it's on Amazon Prime. But it's also like I loved her in Gone Girl, so I'm assuming this is like Gone Girl dialed up to 11.
Oh, she's just scary. She just
Nice.
yeah.
Speaking
of
strong female leads, how'd you like that for a segue?
Mm.
I watched the new Taylor Swift documentary, Miss Americana, the other day. Indulging in my love of all things Tay-Tay.
I need to do this.
It's great. You should totally do it. It covers a period of her sort of life between, I think, like 2018 and 2019, and that sort of looks back. Like there's a lot of sort of archival footage and her talking about her career up until that time. So you sort of get up until the recording of her Lover album, and like you see her sort of in the studio there. But really the meat of it for me is like her talking about politics. Like it's in the lead up to the US election midterms, and like she comes out being political for the first time ever, which is a big deal for like a country, someone that started as a country star or any sort of musical star in America. Her own development and her sort of ups and downs along the way. It covers off like fascinating stuff. Like she had a sexual harassment trial against like a radio DJ that was just, how she dealt with that in sort of terms of like public visibility, and even how she felt that like being one of the most famous women in the world going into court like that was really interesting. And like part of it, like you talk about, like you see that the footage of Kanye West interrupting her, man, that was like, it was a bit of a joke at the time, but
it's like 10 years ago.
But that was like, she was like 18 or something, and he just it's like looking at her face, it's pretty shocking. But she's a ridiculously talented and successful person, and yeah, I came away from it with even more respect for Taylor Swift than I had before. So recommended.
She is. She can't do it. She can do no wrong. She's a titan, a powerhouse. I agree.
Yep, loves
Taylor
cats.
Swift. Maybe we start a Taylor Swift podcast.
Whew.
Yeah. Oh, she just one of my idols. Anyway, we're about to get into this interview, but before we do, this episode has been made possible by G-Shock. We've been wearing around some pieces from their MT range for a while, and we're going to get into those in the coming weeks. Simon Woody Wood has also collaborated on not one but two limited edition G-Shocks, including one that you, Felix, personally own and wear around a bit. This chat is really solid. We talked to Woody about these collabs in specific and how they came to be, so keep an ear out for that towards the end. For more info on G-Shock and the watches we talk about, hit the show notes or head to g-shockaustralia.com.au.
All right, let's get into it. Let's hit speed dial. Woody on the phone.
Today's guest is a flat-out legend. In 2002, he started a magazine with the aim of apparently getting some free shoes. Some call him the definitive source of sneaker knowledge. And little did he know when he released that magazine, called Sneaker Freaker, that it would turn out to be the first international sneaker magazine and global Bible for the street shoe scene. It's a journey that's taken him around the world, seen him collaborate with the likes of Nike, Adidas, and G-Shock. Welcome to OT the Podcast, Simon Woody Wood.
Good evening or morning or whatever it is, wherever you are.
Great to have you on board. How's everything going?
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I'm sort of, I'm feeling much more pessimistic about the year ahead, and hopefully the worst is behind us. But as we know, you can always expect the unexpected in this times that we live in. But what's amazing is that I think during this last 12 months, the sneaker scene has just remained absolutely buoyant against all the odds and all predictions.
Mhm.
Kids are still spending crazy money on shoes. The brands haven't let up, and it's just chugging along, situation normal.
Before we get to where we're at now, I want to pop back in the old time machine to, I don't know, 2001, 2002. You're hanging out at RMIT or somewhere in Melbourne, and you've had an idea to start a magazine. Tell us, how did Sneaker Freaker come about?
I think the idea hit me on the weekend, and by the Friday, I pretty much got started. So I think a lot of kids ask me, so how did you get started, or what did you do? And I go, well, I just did it. I mean, just do it is still the greatest slogan of all time, and there's no substitute for just starting. It's whatever
Mhm.
the first thing is. These days, it would be you'd open an Instagram account. You may not even have a blog these days. I mean, there's so
Yeah.
many different ways to approach it, but in the early 2000s, Melbourne was full of independent small magazines. And if you went into any clothing store, you would have seen Lucky, Vice. I'm not
Oh,
even sure if
God.
Vice was right then, but, there were 10 magazines that were given away. And, they were similar businesses to mine. They were sort of either side hustles or they were just something you did for love. But it's also sometimes agencies made. I remember Large magazine, for example, was sort of like I think they were guys from an advertising agencies who put it out just to get clients and meet brands. So you had a lot of content to consume. If any hairdresser in Melbourne had like 10 magazines on the floor at any one time.
Yeah, sure.
I really thought about it for about 2 minutes. A week later, I'd got started. A week after that, it was finished and it was at the printer. Fast forward to a launch party at Revolver in Paran, and all of a sudden, 300 or 400 people turned up, and there was no digital connection between a community then. There was possibly some internet forums, but nothing in Australia. So word just got out, and it just there's something fucking awesome about having the right idea at the right time because it just puts you in the perfect position to capitalize on whatever it is that you're trying to do. And straight away, I got called a Melda Marcos on every interview. That's just never gets old, that one. And I did TV, I did radio. It was just this sort of people were just fascinated by this idea. Of course, I'd been into it for 20 years already at that stage, so it didn't seem odd to me. But I also didn't know anyone else who was into it. It was just this secret society of one in my case. And I also remember a friend of mine who was big in fashion. She came over to my house when she saw in my closet. She goes, "Have you got like 50 or 60 pairs of shoes?" And I was like, "Yeah." It was a bit embarrassing, to be honest. And of course, nowadays kids have 400 or 500 pairs, and it's seen as a sort of a mark of respect.
That's certainly, where we're coming from with watches. I think that's certainly parallels about feeling, a bit embarrassed back in the day about, having more watches and wrists. So you've got a launch party at Revolver, 300 people that, you might not know rock up. When did you, that might be the answer to this question, but when did you know that Sneaker Freak was a serious business?
Uh, it's tempting to say I still don't, but it's now 20 years later. So, I mean, I think a lot of people, even people at brands, said to me, like years later, they said, "I didn't think you'd ever last, or you just give up, or and you just never know what's going to turn out." I mean, people have all sorts of stupid ideas. I probably had 20 that I never acted on, and this one I did. And as I said, when you've got timing on your side, it's pretty powerful to have the zeitgeist sort of pushing you along.
Yeah.
I think the brands without their support, we wouldn't have existed. So for them, it was quite odd to have someone talking about product in a really personal way with them as well, because before, they had no feedback unless someone rang up and complained on the 1300 number. So they got used to us saying stuff that they didn't like. So there was some teething issues at the start where, I think we became a little bit more corporate as we went along. Certainly today, when you have like 18 or 19 staff. So you got to learn to play the game. If you look at the products, the magazines that we put out, issue 3, I think, is the one where I really got my head around, how to make the content. I was doing it all myself at that point as well.
Mm.
But, when we had a store called Colette in Paris ring up and asked to, can we send a box of magazines? and I started to go, oh man, I went down Australia Post and it was just ridiculous. So I had to go and figure out how to get involved in international shipping. Do I get an account with DHL or FedEx? And you start to get sort of further into the layers of like what the business would become, and that's we couldn't really survive as an Australian business, so we've always been global, and that's the complex part about running a business from the arse end of the world is you're always on the wrong time zone. It's hard to get
Mm.
taken seriously, but at one point we had offices in Cologne, Moscow, Barcelona. We've changed strategy now. It was all getting a bit out of control, and
Yeah.
I was being demented with communications and stuff. But that was pretty amazing. For a magazine made by me in my bedroom for the first year, then in an office to be translated into foreign languages is still sort of one of the high points of Sneaker Freak. I mean, there's so many absurd things that have happened that are incredible for a small little niche business. And even though it's my own story, sometimes I have to reflect on these things and think, fuck, that was pretty weird. How do we get in this situation? Talking to Louis Vuitton about their new shoe just recently, and also, I mean, just all sorts of things. And it's never been boring ever.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. But I'd really be interested in knowing what all that interest in brands and that sort of changing dialogue meant for the type of content you put out.
Uh, I mean, you sell out in micro ways every day, but
Mhm.
I think anyone who runs a business, in media side, is you're just in a constant backwards and forth. It's a bit of a tussle, and sometimes the brand needs you more than you need them, and sometimes you're begging to get a story for the cover, so you'll just debase every value that you hold dear. um, you promise things that you shouldn't. You just got to use all the tricks in the world to try and get what you want out of it. I don't know that it's really changed the content. I think we're still fairly pure in that sense, but even just recently, for example, the last couple of years, we really made a big focus on making sure that the content for our female audience was up to scratch. Um, and that comes down to some really great members of our team, but just working overtime to make sure that we're hitting a lot of bases. I think a lot of companies have had this same sort of realization. We put out the best content we could find every day. We also rely on the brands to produce that content. So without them, there's not much for us to say. But I mean, I think we put out over 100 pieces of content a day. If you consider
Wow.
all our social channels, the blog, 25 blogs a day, some days.
That's
So
wild.
it's a lot, and we try and cover all the cool stuff and then the interesting stuff as well. And then we also try and make sure we've got a fair representation of the brands across the board. I think we're just a more professional organization than we were, 5 years ago, and definitely 10 years ago.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic, and I guess to Felix's point, something that comes with working with brands is collaborations, and looking at the work that Sneaker Freak has been involved with. There's been looks like a couple of dozen. But do you remember what the first collaboration was? Sort of the first official collab that Sneaker Freaker took part in.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have to check the year it was. I think it was 2006. Our first collaboration was with Lacoste on the Missouri 85. And it was a source of constant anxiety for me. How do you get a collaboration, and what am I doing wrong if I haven't got one? And it was sort of it was an exciting time in that field. It still is now, but that time it was just the most extraordinary gift to be given by a brand. So I'm really pleased that Mark Godwin from Lacoste and gave me that opportunity, and we did a kind of a fairly simple retake on a tennis shoe that they put out. Looks like a cross trainer, but it was sort of a tennis shoe that you could wear in the gym. We launched that shoe in New York. We gave away 32 pairs. I remember
Hmm.
Pharrell turned up, so I gave him a pair of shoes. Felt like I'd lost my virginity for the first time. We can only lose it for the first time, I guess. But it was just amazing to put that away, and then we're off. And I think we've worked really hard since then to make sure, and I still do them all.
Hmm.
I'm very involved in the storytelling, the sort of stupid names that we come up with that are entertaining. A lot of them have a very Australian flavour. We've done shoes with New Balance called the Tassie Devil and the Tassie Tiger. That doesn't mean anything, but like G-Shock watches, when I think about Ant-Man or Frogman or all those things,
Hmm.
and also in the the car scene, if someone builds a custom car, they give it a name. Coming up with a great pun or a great story is intrinsic to the way the product's designed. It doesn't mean that it has to be super literal
Yep.
in terms of a visual outcome, but you need to package up the whole thing. And I always think, you need to be able to say, I've got my Tassie Devils on, and it sounds cool. It doesn't sound sort of
Yeah.
jarring or stupid. So yeah, there's a lot to it. We've got 4 or 5 shoes coming out this year. Last year was a bit of a bust. Things just didn't happen, but we've got some really exciting stuff coming out this year. We've done 2 watches with G-Shock, which have
Oh,
both
damn.
been outstanding projects to work on. And I'm really proud of all the projects we've done. Sometimes it's a bit of a battle to get what you want out of the situation, whether that's using the type of materials that you want. The distribution can be difficult. I mean, can be very stressful aspect because there's a lot riding on it. Your brand is out, and if people don't vibe on what you've created, it's an embarrassment, and you want things to sell out, within a day or two. So yeah, there's a lot riding on creatively from a brand building point of view, but there's no more fun than when something you make takes off and it's the thing that everybody wants. It's amazing how many friends you've got all of a sudden when when that happens.
And you got the new drop. Well, it certainly seems to be something that's very, very common in 2020. And as you said, 2006 or thereabouts, 15 years ago now. I imagine that was pretty early on in the collaboration space for, a digital publication. I'm sure it was much more common with stores or chains of stores, especially in the sneaker thing. And it's nothing new to sneakers, but it's become it's a massive thing. I mean, if we think about Hodinkee, which is that a United States based watch blog, they sort of do a collaboration. On average, it's probably once a month with a watch brand. What do you make of this sort of trend, and do you think it's changed the role that platforms like Sneaker Freaker have?
Well, I think in our world, we are still unique in the sense of, well, we're based outside of one of the, any of the largest cities, so it's still strange. And I've been in meetings before where people don't know who I am, and they'll just say, and I'll become apparent that Sneaker Freak is based in Australia, and some people nearly fall off their chair and think they just assumed it was always based in New York, probably if you're in America or wherever. So our story is still, from that point of view, our location is still odd. The collaboration model on the one hand is completely tired and burnt out and jaded. It's done. But the transition at the moment is more into away from the stores at a sneaker level. In that early period, the stores were putting out stuff, and it was like every time a piece of news came out, it was like the greatest thing that had ever happened. And it was poured over and analyzed. It was more exciting, and that's what happens in those early years. Things take on a greater importance. Now there's just so much content. There's so many shoes coming out. So on the one hand, and we have a lot of discussions with brands, and periodically some of them will drop collaborations for a period, and then they sort of realize they actually produce the best shoes. So there's a double-edged sword there. Don't do too many. Don't burn people out on it. But also, they're better than your general releases. You need something to make people queue up in the rain, and if you can do that, it's a pretty powerful moment for the brand.
And sell out a bunch of units. Where do you think this sort of collaboration came from? Like, if you go back to maybe the origins, what jumps out, maybe skateboarders. Back in like the 70s and 80s, they used to sort of partner up with the brands and release things together. Is it before that?
It's not it's definitely not before that. I mean, the running industry sort of started in the 70s, and of course across all sports, brands have always had ambassadors or they've signed people. I mean, you could call Jordan a collaboration if you want to, but it's not called that. I mean, a big retailer like Foot Locker doesn't do collaborations, but they're granted what's called an SMU, where it's a special makeup. They can choose the colors. They don't really talk about it. They might call it an exclusive, but a big deal's not made about it. So it has been around in the industry for a long time. And if a retailer will take it on, they might order 3 to 10,000 pairs. So it can be done. But for whatever reason, those guys, it's not called a collaboration. And we've done shoes before with certain brands, and they go, "This is not a collaboration." I go, "Okay, what is it?" It's an SMU. Okay, well, that means you can't actually put your name on the shoe. You can put it on the footbed, but you can't put it on the shoe. And the obvious question is, why not? And they go, "Well, that's just the rule. That's the rules. You can do an SMU, but you can't do a collab." Casio, for example, don't do collaborations with media companies. Sneaker Freaker falls into this weird gap where we by all rights shouldn't have done the 40 collaborations that we've done, but when you produce good results and you're good to work with, I think one project sort of leads to the other. And so the future of it seems like it'll just be here forever. It's not going away. It's, periodically there's too many. I mean, I remember some stores probably 2 or 3 years ago said they could have 20 on any weekend. So they
Well,
couldn't physically order them all. And so the problem is not with collaborations. The problem is just with boring product that no one wants. The story's stupid. The fabrication looks ghastly. No one really knows who it is, and it's a brand that doesn't really rate. So even if you choose a brand, like if you choose New Balance, you want to choose your model well. You want a brand, like at the moment, Asics in particular say all their product from the late 2000s or the early 2000s is on fire. So that's
yeah.
you have to be able to see ahead because can take anywhere from 18 months to 2 years for it to come out. I know that's insane, but you have to kind of somehow predict the market.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, if you think collaborations is like a business model and a marketing tool are here to stay, but they're becoming increasingly, normal, prevalent, and less cool. What is cool in sneakers at the moment?
I might just come back to your previous question because there was a point
Yeah.
that I
Yeah,
wanted to
no,
make.
go
So I didn't probably answer it. I just went off on a tangent, which you'll find I do regularly. Um,
tangents, man. Still,
I, I I do think. I mean, I think Casio was onto this well before the sneaker industry was. In terms of collaborations and using people, like if you look back at the '90s, a lot of the stuff that was done, and I don't totally understand it all because it all really happened in Tokyo or Japan only.
yeah.
But all through that '90s period, they were using Japanese musicians, film people, like everyone with a sort of a pop culture profile, were often dialed into the brand either through a model or sort of ambassadorships or whatever. So, I think the language around the shoes, I mentioned before the names, the nicknames around product, that kind of collector culture has
Mm.
always been big in sneakers. And shoes like the Air Max 95 were massive in Tokyo long before anyone in the rest of the world kind of understood their appeal. So, I do credit and Casio was a big part of that with the way they treated G-Shock. And over time, I think G-Shock kind of took that into the West. Today, they're sort of more involved in action sports, skiing, skateboarding, BMXing, they're sort of fortes now. But back in that 90s period in Tokyo, they were working with a lot of different people.
100%. So, what did we ask before? What's cool? What's cool at the moment in Sneakerland?
Yeah, Nike. Nike
Okay.
is incredibly dominant. It's been that way it's been that way since probably the 80s in some level. But Adidas had a purple patch there for a year or two when the Boost came out. Kanye joined them. They had it all. They had it all on the table, and it just slipped through their fingers. It's quite amazing to watch. You can see it happening, and perhaps whatever's happening now, those seeds were sown a year ago or 2 years ago. In the case of product development, they had a shoe called the NMD that was huge, and they just haven't been able to follow it up. And it's incredible. The history of probably the car industry is the same. Watches would be the same. It's hard.
Mm.
It's hard to maintain that constant sort of trajectory. But at the moment, Nike's super strong. I mean, they're just coming out with so much stuff, and they're just a content factory for us. There's just so many great things to talk about. Last week they had a shoe that you can put on without touching it.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Just a cool little idea that's also about accessibility for people that aren't able to, bend down and deal with their shoes. You just put your
Nice.
foot in it and off you go. So, they just, when they get like that, it's so creative. What I would love to see is all the brands firing at once. So that there's this sort of one-upmanship happening all the time. Rarely happens in that way. But New Balance is on fire at the moment as well. So they've got a super impressive range of connections with people in the US and Europe. And, everything they're putting out looks really good.
That's awesome. All right. Well, speaking of collabs, I want to hear what your dream collaboration is. And maybe it's with the brand you haven't worked with before, but I want to hear the brand and the sneaker model.
Well, see, this is the thing. It gets very hard to talk about things because you might rule something in or out in the future, and you've also got projects on the go. So, we've got a few. We do have a few pretty amazing things coming.
Mhm.
There's something I'm working on at the moment that remains to be seen whether it'll get the green light, and if it does, it will certainly blow people's minds. I'd like to think beyond sneakers, and I'd love to do a sneaker freak edition of a car.
Wow.
Sounds
what
crazy. I
brand?
don't know which.
What car?
Well,
Blue sky
question.
thinking. Look, Is it a Kia?
Well, some sort of souped up Tesla would be pretty good. I don't.
Tesla. I was going to say
Ooh.
Tesla's
Tesla would be
on
good.
brand for sneakers.
Yeah, I think so. But
truck.
it also could do some sort of off-road truck. Maybe one of those. The new Rivian brand looks pretty amazing. They're like I mean, I'd love to get a Cybertruck too. I just don't know how big it is yet and whether it would survive in Melbourne.
The
but
Rivians do look good.
Rivian looks good. Yeah, and I think they're pretty close. Might be later this year.
Interesting. Hey, you were saying so Nike are the coolest at the moment, and they have been for a long time. What was it like meeting and interviewing Tinker Hatfield?
It's a bit intimidating sometimes. Bit like if you are at a concert and all of a sudden you walk around the corner and Dave Grohl's there or whoever it is, like someone that you love. It can be a little bit too much. You have to sort of control your heart rate and your breathing and just remember that they're just a normal person. In Tinker's case, an amazing storyteller, an incredible prolific designer of just some of the most incredible shoes of all time. So you can have multiple conversations with him about various, it's hard to know where to start with him. If you read the Ultimate Sneaker Book, which is something that I wrote a couple of years ago now, it's available on Tashin. I think he's in every fourth page, one way or another, between cross trainers, ACG, Air Max. He's had a hand in so many shoes, Jordan as well, of course. And I was really lucky to spend a week with Tinker in Moab in the US on an ACG junket where we're out camping for a week, walking around these incredible desert scenery, wearing the latest ACG products. And he told me so many great stories. We were high as a kite just from being out in this pure oxygen out there. And we had I remember I had one beer, we had the campfire going, and he was just telling stories. And I sort of forgot them all. Everything was off the record. And it's just incredible life that he's had as a shoe designer. He's an architect originally. He could have done anything. He somehow transferred over to shoe design, and it's hard to imagine Nike in the sneaker scene without his input, really, if you break down all the shoes he's been involved in.
Yeah, so just quickly, he came across my radar. I'm not a massive sneaker guy, but he came across my radar. I think I was watching Abstract on Netflix, 3 or 4 years ago now, and there's the episode with Tinker, and you kind of get an understanding of his involvement in the sneaker industry and just how important he's been. But how would you summarize that for people that might not know who Tinker Hatfield is?
Well, he's, everyone calls Jordan the GOAT. I guess, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that he's the greatest sort of shoe designer, probably by sales. Although, if you count the Chuck Taylor, who knows, because that shoe is just the highest selling shoe in the history of the universe. But I just think in terms of Nike's history as the biggest brand, go through all the shoes, the first Air Maxes, the first Jordans, the Air Trainer 1, the Safari. I mean, and that's before you get into all the other projects that he's not known for, Moab in ACG. It's just so many of them. I don't know, the way he used paneling to use color, the way he thought about adding storytelling to shoes. He was so far ahead of everyone, and yet everything still was accessible. He didn't just do weird stuff. And if you look at the Air Max 1 now, you would say, well, that's such a familiar looking shoe. It's not shocking. It's just perfection. The scale of it, the way you can use color to change its identity. But he broke it down into basically red, white, and grey, and that at the time was a bit shocking. So he tells some amazing stories about how the sales guys would come and leave notes on his desk attacking him for doing all this crazy shit. But of course, over a period of time, that's the thing about when you're ahead of the time, everybody all of a sudden realizes, man, this guy knows what's up. And without someone like him, you don't see progression in design. You see just the same old stuff served up over and over. So you can't really give him more credit than just saying he's the best.
And in that sort of legendary figure space, there's another sort of name that pops up on Sneaker Freaker, and that is Dapper Dan. Can you tell us a little bit about his influence and what it's like, to exist in the same space as that guy?
I thought you were going to say Stephen Smith, actually, because he's the kind of guy that will listen to this and then ask why I didn't give him a shout out.
Well, you have now.
So I'll just go a little bit further.
He was next question.
Stephen did the Pump Fury. He worked at New Balance for a long time, did the some of the 99s shoes. Also another genius, and now works with Kanye in the late stages of his career, and is doing an incredible job there. So he's another person that I have tremendous respect for him. I've written, I think, 4 books about the shoes that he's designed, so he gets his fair share of shine.
Sure.
Dapper Dan, I mean, Dapper Dan is such an interesting character. I actually just bought his book last week. Another person that's 30 or 40 years ahead of his time in a way, and I think it's amazing how he's come full circle. Where the brands like Gucci and Louis
Yep.
Vuitton and those guys put him out of business because they didn't want New York hood people wearing the
Sure.
brands. Also because the fact that let's face it, he copied their designs. And now, of course, I think he was in the Gucci campaign from last year or the year before.
Mm.
So, and in between, he sort of had this 25-year period where he just disappeared. And I got a direct connection with him. I bought a pair of shoes from someone in the US who told me they were Dapper Dans. They're a pair of New Balances, and they're wrapped in a designer fabric. I think it's Gucci. I should know that. But I just was never sure, and there was no way to contact him. He's not on Instagram. He doesn't have a blog. He's sort of invisible. He's not from that generation.
Mhm.
And I was like, man, I'm really reluctant to put my neck out here and say it is. I thought it was. That's what I was told when I bought them. I didn't pay. Must admit, I didn't pay a huge amount for them. They're really interesting. They're quite well made. They've really stood the test of time. And he popped up. He did a little video interview with Jay-Z's video channel.
Mhm.
And there was some way to contact him. So I reached out, sent him a photo, and he confirmed they were his shoes, and he remembered making them, which you wouldn't really associate him with New Balance. So that was it was a really odd connection. And we did the interview, and that is also in the Ultimate Sneaker Book. And it's amazing to hear from him. And, again, someone that was so far ahead of its time. And I mean, he changed that trajectory of European fashion into hip hop. I mean, he had Mike Tyson punching on out the front of his store. I think his store used to be open 24 hours a day because a lot of his customers, they worked unusual hours and paid cash,
Mhm.
if you know what I mean. So
Sure.
Uh-huh.
the stories that he could tell if he wanted to, if he could get them out of him, would be incredible.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, one thing that's kind of come up a few times now is sneaker culture, and you mentioned you'd been really into the sneaker culture 20 years before you started Sneaker Freak, so that puts it at about 35 years. How has it changed in sort of those 3 or 4 decades that you've been kind of immersed in it?
Well, it's a thing now. I mean, it didn't exist back in that time. But if you read Babito Garcia's book, Where'd You Get Those? I mean, he was staring at people's shoes in the 70s.
Hmm.
And he, one of the great stories he tells is that he can remember every single kid in his class, what they wore, their
Wow.
sneakers. So, and I have similar memories when I was probably 8 or 9, checking out the reflection in of my shoes. But, in those days, I'd like to say I was wearing something exotic and, you know, imported from North America, but I mean, it was Dunlop Volleys and KT 26s all the way until
Nice.
probably sometime in high school. As a little known fact about me, I won a tournament playing squash. Sorry, I didn't win a tournament. I won a prize in a tournament at squash, and the prize was a trip to America. And so I went to America when I was probably 12 or 13, and I was able to bring back a whole lot of Nikes and stuff. So, those are pivotal moments. And I remember this kid that I saw, and he had this kind of the tongue stuffed up through the laces and stuff. And I remember those little things. Any proper sneaker collector will just tell you these funny little moments. If you can remember them, it sort of really sorts out whether you're legit. I remember this
Mm.
kid, the way he wore them, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to start doing that. Um, and and by 2002 it hasn't really changed that much, because there have been a few articles in magazines. There was Crooked Tongues in the UK was around, so there were a few people starting to think the same thing. And what's interesting, a lot of guys my age, with very similar backgrounds, and it's no surprise that we all get along pretty good,
Mm.
is that they started stores. So whether it's Hikmet, who started Soulbox in Berlin, the guys at Sneakers and Stuff in Sweden, Stash in New York. I mean, there's a lot of guys. I mean, that's where sneaker culture came from. Probably there might be 50 people, and I happen to be one of them. So we are sort of responsible for it starting. But I think it was sort of inevitable, really. It was just the timing. The other thing was that Nike skateboarding started in 2002. So, and SB Dunks were sort of they were sneaker culture for probably 4 or 5 years. And then, of course, today, our audience ranges from 12 to probably 60. Um, every single person knows that if you've got a pair of old shoes in the cupboard, they might be worth something. And, there's kids in Melbourne that aren't even 18 yet who are making $100,000 a year buying and selling shoes. So
Crazy.
the commercial, the hustling aspect of it, the entrepreneurial grind of it. If you're really smart, it's amazing the amount of money people have made out of it. And all they've done is figure out how to beat the system, whether that's rigging raffles, using bots, or paying people to turn up to overnight camping. Um, yeah, it's a massive business now.
And so I could be wrong about this, but my vision of when sneakers were culture in the 70s, 80s, and maybe even the 90s, they were using big old air quotes, they were pretty low culture. Like it was street and it was accessible. These days, you're talking, about the prices these things have, and you're talking about Louis Vuitton and like massive fashion conglomerates taking this very, very seriously. When did sneakers become that high culture, accessory or part of that world?
You mean like Louis Vuitton
Yeah.
level?
Buscemi, $600, $700 on sneakers.
Well, I think just to go back to the earlier point, I think, sneakers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was all about function. So form a little bit as well, obviously, but shoes were designed to do things: run, jump, play basketball, or whatever. It
Mm.
was really the retro thing didn't really start till the late 90s. And in the last, I've sort of become obsessed with this era because it really predates Sneaker Freaker by 5 to 10 years. There were guys before Sneaker Freaker or before 2002 who were out buying and selling shoes, going to sports stores and getting old stock and then sending it to Japan. So they are the pioneers of this. They weren't called resellers then. They were just meeting demand and moving product around. And of course, in those days, product wasn't globalized like it is now. If you went to a store in New York, you saw something totally different than if you went to London or Tokyo. Now it's fairly uniform. It's very hard to be surprised in a store, because you already know what's in there. And if it's any good, it's already sold out 4 days before anyway. That late 90s period is interesting. Even Saucony brought back a shoe called the Jazz. This is not the coolest shoe in the world. It's like a early 80s nylon runner. And it just took off. And they figured out how to kind of market it to people, bring out limited editions. And it's quite ahead of its time, surprisingly. People wouldn't associate that with Saucony. But I'm just finishing a book for them, and I've found the original guys that worked on the marketing. They did crazy stuff like they drove a van full of shoes into the middle of some hood spots in New York and other cities and just dumped boxes of the shoes so that people would just grab them and start wearing them. I mean, some of the stuff's pretty amazing.
Very clever.
And, and then ended up selling, I think, more than 1 or 2 million pairs in a year. It took off. It went crazy. And that's when the industry went, hang on a minute. People want this old stuff. We don't have to design new things all the time. I mean, those brands still were. Oh, we can keep the Air Force One going and the Dunk and all these other shoes. And then, that kind of over the next 5 years, that leads up to 2002. So, just going back to Sandy Bodecker gets given the job of starting Nike skateboarding. And Nike had done it before and had been an absolute failure. And he brought the culture together. He connected a lot of dots, got people on the same team, and that really set the framework for what was to come.
Yeah, awesome. And so when do you think these luxury brands?
Oh yeah, see, that's another one. I didn't answer your question, did I? I gave you the answer I want to give you. Look, it's always been there, but if you think back to 2002, no one was impressed if you were wearing a Louis Vuitton shoe, and these days, we saw that with the Dior Jordans. That I think is there 5 million people entered the raffle or something for how many pairs? Now they're worth $30,000 US. So
mental.
The connection from a price point of view between the $2,000 price point of a Louis Vuitton sneaker and a Nike shoe that's been bought for 150 and resold for 1,000, there's no gap anymore. Like it doesn't scare anyone to pay 2,000 for a Vuitton shoe. I think that their product design, and we've seen with Virgil Abloh's gone to Vuitton. He's producing shoes for those kids, and a lot of them are based in China. They have endless amounts of money. Some of these Chinese kids, and they'll buy a $30,000 off-white outfit and a pair of $5,000 shoes. Money's no object to some kids. It's been creeping together for a long time. Kanye, before, people often forget. Around his Nike time, he put out 3 or 4 shoes with Louis Vuitton, and they've crept up in value substantially. I remember you could have bought them for 3 or 4 grand. I think they're probably 10 or 15 now. Each one has a different price, so it's hard to know. And they're not sold very often, so finding a confirmed sale, what the price might be, is really difficult. Yeah, to answer your question, there is no gap anymore. And
Yeah, okay.
in the last year, I think as well, we saw really a Vuitton Nike is probably the holy grail that hasn't happened yet. And if that does, I mean, that would be nuts. Vuitton's also putting out skate shoes at the moment with Lucy and Clark. So, they're getting to skateboarding as well. So that's really sort of indicative of the way the world's gone. Everything's splintered and fractured. Everything's available at different levels now. And it feels honestly like there's just an overwhelming amount of choice. And, that can be fantastic, but also can be just too much. It just depends.
It's really interesting because the sneakers are made in such volume, like even a limited edition sneaker, it's probably, thousands or tens of thousands. What do you think about the premiums and the hype? Are sneakers an investment? Would you think about seriously putting, 20 grand into a certain sneaker and kind of hoping that it, doubled in 5 years?
You could. Yeah. Look, there's people that have done it. I mean, you've seen some of Jordan's game worn shoes in the last year go for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I forget the prices. You'd have to go back and check it. I don't want to say anything stupid, but it's crazy what these things are worth. I mean, a pair of Jordan shoes that he wore in a particular game should be in the Smithsonian to me. You also have Nike's archive buying up significant shoes. I mean, we did an interview with a guy called Lindy Darrell, who was a sort of the middleman between the person that had that owned the first pair of Nikes that ever won a gold medal. And it's a pretty good trivia quiz because no one will ever get it. But you name an athlete that you think would be the first Nike person to win a gold.
Can you give us a year?
I'd have to
Or a
research it.
decade?
Let's just say they're not American for starters, so it's kind of odd.
Ooh. I don't know, like some
I have no idea.
British
All
tennis
right, this
player
could go
or
on
something?
forever. So, no, I don't think tennis was until more recent times. But anyway, it was Steve Ovett, and
Okay.
this person was involved somehow in looking after Steve's shoes, and at the time he didn't think much of it, and they ended up in their keep. And then through a few discussions, they ended up back at Nike, which is I think exactly where they belong. But what price do you put on something like an artifact like that? Beyond that, I don't know. I feel like if you look at any collector market, you could say the same thing about 60s Ferraris.
Mhm.
30 million, then 50 million, then 60 million. In the car world, a convertible 71 Cuda, they're multi-million-dollar cars. At some point, there are corrections, and
Mhm.
you would have expected that to happen in the last 12 months, but there's no sign of it.
People have
But a lot of
dug
this
deeper
stuff
into their
is,
hobbies.
well, honestly, a lot of this stuff is quite secretive. People aren't really talking about things. What might be happening on the surface might not be really happening, but it just seems like the market is incredibly buoyant. When I try and explain it to someone, especially the father or the mother of a child that's missed out on a shoe and just can't understand how you can get they should just be able to buy this shoe that they want, but they don't understand they need a bot or, they need to kind of beat this cooked system. When you sort of put it in real terms, I don't feel particularly great about like what it is and what it's become, but it's just the nature of the beast. And of course, money just ruins everything.
Money wins.
Yeah.
That's funny. I have to tell my friends' mummies too why I can't help them get steal Rolex at retail as well. So
Well, Rolex are another great brand, right? I mean, they famously cut their production. Was it last year? They made
yeah, apparently
half as
last
many
year.
watches or whatever, and that's straight out of the Nike playbook. Fear of missing out. Don't give people everything they want. And I think they were concerned that the value long term would go down, and they would lose that investor that likes buying a watch every year.
The
I think,
speculators as well.
you were talking before, and this is just a side point. I think Rolex were the first to use an ambassador as well, like have a formal ambassador relationship in 1926.
20
There you
studs.
go.
There you go.
Yeah.
26.
Anyway.
Rolex ahead of their time. So one of my favorite things to do is watch complexes show sneaker shopping on YouTube, and I'm constantly looking, seeing people like Little Yachty and soccer players and NBA players come on and not only cop new sneakers but talk about their current collections and their connections. And I'm really curious from in your opinion, who is the coolest sneaker collector out there?
This is just me, and I'm, as cynical as they come, but anyone with money, to me,
Mhm.
that is a collector is just not that cool. I mean, there's amazing guys who collect cars like Bruce Meyer, I think in the US, who just owns these incredible cars, and I
Jens
admire,
Peterson, right?
yeah, I admire his taste and his collection of cars, and he's been a very successful person. Ralph Lauren, I think, does he own 150 Ferraris or something? You
Something
Phenomenal
silly, yeah.
collection.
research the numbers, like these guys are into it, so you can't deny that. But in the last issue, one of my favorite pieces we've done for a long time is with Tommy Rebel, who's just he's not famous. He's not a New York hipster or a hip hop dude or anything. He's just a regular dude. He's like me before I started Sneaker Freaker. He doesn't have some cachet in the business. He's not known. He's in the film called Just for Kicks, but incredibly entertaining and a full-on New York dude. Like, I just love hearing him tell stories, and he's got stories for days. But his story about Just for Kicks is, when they were talking about who's going to be in it, he's talking to the film director, and he says, "So who are you going to interview?" And he goes, "Oh, we're going to see Damon Dash, and we're going to see, you know, all these sort of name people." And he goes, "But that's not what it's about." And I
Mhm.
totally agree with him. We are totally of the same view, which is, these guys that have money, they have basically a sneaker pimp that's in charge of going and buying shoes for them, and
The plug.
they just have money, and it doesn't always buy you taste, or it doesn't buy you knowledge. Half the time they probably don't even know what they're wearing, but it's part of their commercial image. They have to
Mhm.
have this stuff, and
Mm.
most of the time they're flexing it like they've been given it by Nike. And I know for a fact that probably at least half the time, or maybe more, they've actually bought this stuff at ridiculous premium because they just have to have it. And
Yeah, sure.
so, there's that cynical aspect to it that, I'd rather the guy that had, one of my favorite collector stories is, I'm pretty sure this shoe was called the Devlin. This is probably like a long time ago. There's only, I think, 16 colors, and this guy's got 15. And it's a shoe that absolutely no one cares about. And he's made it his life's mission to find this 16th color that was only available somewhere, and he sent it in a catalog or something. I love that obsession. I love the fact that
Yeah.
he's just doing it. He's not famous. We found him somehow, and it's one of my favorite collector stories. The guy that's got every Yeezy or something, every hype shoe in the last 5 years, and who says they've been into it their whole life.
Yeah.
It's not that cool. But that's just the way of the world.
Pivoting from cool just for a second. I'm looking for the ultimate dad sneaker.
New
Not
Balance.
limited. New
New
Balance?
Balance.
Which one? Be specific.
Anything from the 99 series.
Okay.
Nothing says I've got a Labrador and I've got a porch and I'm walking down to get the paper by the lake on a Saturday morning than a New Balance shoe.
Mate, the only thing missing is the Labrador.
They you could interchange any number of dogs, I suppose. But they suit a heavy guy. They're indestructible. They look good in grey, beige, brown, and black, which is pretty much what all that stuff was made in. Navy and blue, of course, are their corporate colours, so I look good in those too. But yeah, if you want a dad shoe, that's it. I mean, the dad shoe thing's been quite funny because it's sort of been turned into something, dad core or,
Yeah.
norm core. I mean, all these things are sort of splinter factions, and now you have Gorp core. There's just so many cores.
There's too many
And
cores.
cores, of course.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you can't beat a pair of trusty old New Balances for being a dad.
All right. Well, another sneaker recommendation. Felix wants me to ask what the
Well,
ultimate
you gotta-
daddy
you gotta own it,
sneaker
Andy.
is.
You got to own
You
it.
got to own the ultimate daddy sneaker.
Or Zaddy.
Or zaddy, the trendy daddy.
Trendy daddy. Well, it depends on your style, doesn't it? To explain this person to me, because it could depend.
Japanese
like,
denim. Bit of
I'm wearing
Filson.
I'm wearing today the Supreme MX-TNs.
Okay.
They're luminescent green, orange on them. They are really offensive, and I've been told by quite a few people, friends of mine, who are not into this sneaker thing, but they actually are sort of offended I mean, I think that's absolutely fantastic reaction to get from people. And now everything's become so cool. It's actually quite nice to get sort of the obvious reaction to wearing something. But at my age, I'm also very conscious of not being like the oldest dude in the nightclub. I need to wear something
Mhm.
kind of age appropriate, but every now and then you still need to flex something kind of ridiculous. So that's the kind of the duality you need to kind of consider. It needs to be interesting, but it has to match whatever else you've got on. So that's the key. What do you wear, and what can you get away with?
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, my last recommendation, I think this is one I'm always searching for an answer on. So if anyone can give me that answer, I think it's going to be you. What is the ultimate clean white sneaker for everyday denim, whatever you want to wear it with?
Air Force One, white on white, no
That's a
contest.
Good
quick
answer.
answer. That was a very quick
Well, you
answer.
say it like there's anything else. I mean, I'm not into flat soled shoes. Like I'm not a Stan Smith guy. Uh,
Uh-huh.
if you've got a wide foot, you can't get into a superstar or a Stan Smith. So, um, and let's face it, the Air Force One gives you about an extra inch. So most blokes could do with an extra inch, one way or the other. Um, but it's funny. The white on white shoes. Everyone makes a big deal of them. That they have been the staple in the industry since sort of day one. Um, and I think at the moment, you're even struggling to buy a white on white Air Force One at Foot Locker because they just walk out the door. Um, they are just so utilitarian. They're indestructible. They're $150, and if you trash them, you just go and get a new one.
Amazing. Hey, so we're theoretically a watch podcast. We should probably have a chat about G-Shock. What's the appeal of G-Shock?
It's kind of a similar thing to sneakers, and it's the accessory. Um, I wear a black t-shirt and a pair of camo pants, but I'll always put more thought into what's on my wrist or on my feet. And if you can color coordinate those two things and your hat, then you've got a winning fit, as they say. Um, I, I'm obsessed with G-Shock because the story is fantastic. The products they've released over the years and the amount of technology they've been able to cram into this thing about the size of a 50-cent piece is honestly nuts. And I like weird stuff, whether it's shoes or watches. And G-Shock's put out a lot of weird watches. Casio has as well. I have watches that measure ratios on maps. I remember when
Sure.
they had a temperature gauge. I mean, that's really standard now. But when that came out, they could measure the temperature. It was pretty nuts. Not entirely sure it ever worked. Barometric pressure, altimeters. I also had the one that played MP3s,
Oh,
which was
nice.
huge. I had a largest watch competition with my friend Andy, and he had the biggest one I'd ever seen in camo. I have to check the name of it. Um, and then I went out whiles later and got the GPS one, which had this huge battery on the side that just looks absolutely mental. But the bigger the better. Anything like a massive sensor on the side, I was obsessed with. And the fantastic thing about as a collector of G-Shock is that the prices are really reasonable. Certain things have really gone up, like the Gundam series, the heavy metal series, the crazy gangster watches
Yeah.
seem to have snuck up to $600, $700, $800. But for years, I just bought them, and you might pay sometimes less than retail. I was never fussed about whether they were perfect in the box because I wore them all. Um,
Yep.
Mhm.
but again, I had pivotal moments with the brand. I think everybody remembers that super basic kind of Casio when it first came out. But I think one of the first times I went overseas, I was in Hong Kong, and I really had money for my trip, and I was staring in the window, and I saw the blue crazy gangsters, and it's just massive. And the funny thing is, it doesn't actually do anything. Um, it doesn't really have any functions except alarm, but it's just big, and it's just so aggressive and so masculine and so sort of robotic. Very incredibly Japanese design, and G-Shock's always perfected that. And plus the toughness angle. Um, and the further you get into it, a bit like Nike, they have so many products to cycle in and out of the market. The big
Mm.
ones, the little ones, the kind of ugly ones, the amazing looking ones. They're amazing, really incredible company.
You really, yeah, it's a great brand like that, and I think collaborations have been a massive part of G-Shock, over the years, and I mean, we can't not talk about the two that you've done with G-Shock. So you did the Nightowl in 2015, and then the Redback in 2018. I feel like we're due for another collaboration, but why don't you tell us about the two that you have done?
Yeah, the first one we did the 6900, which is I guess is like the Chuck Taylor of G-Shocks. It's probably probably one of the highest selling models of all time. It's a good size. It's not one of the small ones. It's not one of the really big ones. It's fairly limited color palette. It was fairly restrictive what we could do to the watch. We didn't have total freedom. I think right up until it even came out, there was a bit like Japanese guys weren't so too confident that we would pull it off and it would be interesting. But we really, really amazing campaign behind it, and the packaging was great. We went into a lot of trouble. We had a really kick-ass party, and the watch sold out all over the world, and was really successful. So that gave us the clout
Mm.
a couple of years later to go back again, and this time we had a bit more freedom. So we brought back the what's called the vampire design, which is it's got the red thing, which had only really been used once or twice before. It's not the most readable face, but it's really, to me, it was one of the all-time classic G-Shocks. So when you hit the button, instead of it going electric blue, it went red. And we're able to get them to make that again in exactly the same way it was originally. And we just hit it with grey and red, and we produced a really amazing campaign for it. We had a party on Halloween, which sort of fitted the snake, not the snake, the spider kind of theme, and we packaged them inside a coffin. Sometimes you just, like, you never quite know. There's a lot of times we propose things and it's never happened, but with Casio, they always just said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. So we made this coffin, and it opened up and the watch was inside. So, like, just an amazing project to work on creatively, and just a project as a fan of the brand. Probably two of my favorite collaborations we've ever done, because I just couldn't believe it's like being given the keys to a Porsche when you're 16 or something. It's just amazing to be given that access into the brand. I mean, there's so many things you could do. I would love to bring back some of their old watches. That's probably the next stage of the relationship. I don't know what they're thinking about, what's coming up, but they just do so much stuff. They're incredibly inventive and innovative. And meeting Mr. eBay, who's the original inventor of the G-Shock concept, is pretty amazing as well.
Yes, I definitely want to ask about what it's like meeting Mr. eBay. But first, I've got the Redback, and it's one of my sort of more reliable watches. But you're absolutely right. You've done a really, really good job in distinctive but restrained design. Like, so often when someone does a collaboration, they're like, I want to chuck my logo all over it. It wants to be, all these colors, all this stuff. And I think you've struck a really nice balance of having an iconic design, subtle, personal touches, and going all out on the packaging. It's a really winning combination. Well done.
Yeah, I think one of the keys as well is whatever you do, you've got to magnify the meaning and the what the product is. So I really feel the pressure to do something no one's done. And
Mm.
sometimes if that means taking a risk by choosing a model that isn't obvious, as we did on the Redback, but also adding that authentic touch with the vampire display, that's something that only a few people really know about or care about, to be honest. For the true nut that's out there, and I even got messages recently on Instagram, someone saying, man, I still look at my Redback and I can't believe you managed to bring that back or whatever. It's my favorite thing ever. So those things are incredibly sort of meaningful. This is a business, but still there's so much passion involved from me, but also from other people in the industry. Getting the keys to do something like that, it is a privilege and an honor. I know it's kind of corny to sort of put it in those terms, but I just don't want to put out another crap thing in the world that is overflowing with crap. It needs to be loved and cherished for a long time. And that's that fine edge between doing something basic and boring and putting no work in. We've seen so many collaborations like that, and they really don't stand the test of time. But also, if you go too nuts, it's not something you can wear regularly. It's sort of, you're trying too hard. Somewhere in the middle
Yeah.
is where you need to be. And I think in our case, we put a lot of time into the story, into the film that we made. Even with the Nightowl, we had an early meeting, and I said, when we had the party, I said I wanted to have a 3 meter tall night owl that had laser beams coming out of the eyes. And then
Cool.
the Nightowl to me was just a cool name that sounded like something G-Shock might have used in the 90s. Like when I met Mr. eBay and some of the really high up people at Casio, my favorite series of watches is the Crazy Gangsters. I said, Mr. eBay, I finally got a chance to meet you. What does Crazy Gangsters mean? There must be, I was expecting some great story. And he goes, oh, I don't know, it just sounds really cool. I mean, he said it in a really great Japanese kind of voice, but sometimes just things have to sound cool and that's enough. But for
Yep.
me, I'm always looking for that extra layer of meaning. So Redback is a great Australian story, but you turn the watch over and it's red. I mean, there's elements of that color palette in there, and of course, red, black, and white is just a classic sort of sneaker combination. So you know, and I respect anyone who does a collaboration and puts the work in, because a lot of people don't. They take the check. They didn't even personally get involved in the design or the marketing of it, and they have as little to do with it as possible. But we've always tried to work our asses off with any project we've taken on.
Absolutely. And I really like on both those collabs you've done where you've messed with the LEDs. I think that's a sort of level of detail and care that a lot of people would pass over. So what did the Nightowl say on the LED display?
It says "Keep your laces loose," which is our slogan that's sort of been in the mag since I think the first issue back in 2002. So the second one, of course, just has the vampire display. So
Yeah.
there was no option for the backlight message. When you go back to the Crazy Gangsters, all of those watches had weird things like one of them used to say "rave." Party on, and it'd be like a slot machine spinning around. And then others had from different series had, the most famous one is the redhead pinup, which is a girl sort of lying back in a sort of bikini. But some of them had dragons and all sorts of sort of American World War II sort of imagery. Coming from Japan where nothing was written or explained about, there was no way to find information. So, it was always mysterious. And mysterious is something that's not really that popular or just doesn't happen anymore. Everyone overshares and over explains anything. But as a collector, when you don't understand something and you find out a little bit of information from someone, kind of blows your mind. I mean, one of the earliest G-Shocks was called the Jason. It took me years to figure it out. And then someone goes, yeah, it looks like Jason's mask from Friday the 13th or whatever. And I went, oh, man, I've been thinking about that for such a long time. And then it's right in front of you, So again, that's that layer of meaning. People saw something in the design and that's what it takes on a life of its own because of the community around it.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I think the base model for the Night Owl was the 6900 reference, which we saw late last year with a special edition that John Mayer did with Hodinky. Have you seen this release?
I haven't seen the John Mayer one. Do I look at it now?
Yeah, type in John Mayo G-Shock, it'll come up. But it's the same sort of obviously base model, and it was his first, I guess, collaboration as a watch, and it sort of obviously sold out, I think, incredibly quickly
Yeah.
Via sort of the stockists and Hodinky's website. How does it stack up to sort of your expectations of a limited edition?
Well, it's a watch with colours on it. It's not. I mean, it's sort of. I guess it gets by on the strength of John Mayer's link to streetwear and to sneakers is really actually incredibly authentic and strong. He's always been seen in cool stuff. I remember seeing him play in the courtyard at the back of the A Life store, the A Life store in New York years ago, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Just Blaze was DJing and had a drum machine, and he was playing guitar, and I was like, wow, I really understand what an incredible guitarist he is. So he's into it. Like he cares about this stuff. So I can't really comment any further than that. It doesn't look like they've really pushed the creative boundaries. But sometimes, if you're a fan of John Mayer and you follow that website, just having that is enough. But again, with the 6900, like your options aren't huge. It barely has any space. If you look at the three
Yeah.
dials at the top, you have a tiny amount of real estate to put a logo there. And who knows what constrictions were placed on that design. Like aside from coloring in adjust and mode and start stop, there's not a million options with that. I think you can color the G button. Aside from that, you can put a print on the strap. But the simplicity of the 6900 sometimes is that's all you can do to it. Just means you can't really go crazy with it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's look into it when we're off the call, but it's got a cute little backstory about he sort of color matched it from his keyboards, like one of his early keyboards or something like that. It's a nice story that
There you go.
goes really well. So I want to circle back to meeting Mr. eBay. He's obviously like the guy that the engineer that invented G-Shock and the sort of the series of tests that have made them last literally. What was it like meeting like this guy who created something that you love and learning anything from him?
It's a little bit like meeting Tinker for the first time as well. You've got to just get a bit of composure together, and then you realize that he's just a normal guy that's been in the business for a long time. He still loves telling the story. So he has a really fantastic presentation that I've seen him do a few times, where he has these really very basic
Yeah.
animated slides in a thing. If you've been to a Casio party, you've seen it, but he's quite a very serious looking person. He's super dapper. I mean, he wears really amazing outfits, and we've photographed him a few times. I wrote a fanzine for G-Shock years ago, and the photos of him at the test facility in Japan with him in his crazy suits and stuff. He's just a classic looking Japanese boffin. Like
Yeah.
if you imagine in your head someone that invented G-Shock, and you see him with his little round glasses and his amazing suits, you just go, man, he's just perfect for that origin story. And then he tells her that he ran up the stairs and he threw it out the window to see if it survived, and then they did it again and again and again. And brands need that origin story. It's what sets them apart from many other watch companies that are just in the business. So his English is good, not incredible. It's much better than my Japanese. So it's hard to have a really fast-paced, sort of chinwag with him.
Exchange of ideas. Yeah.
But at the same time, he's just you just listen when he's talking. He has
Yeah.
incredible aura about him, and I love the fact also that if there's a party that G-Shock's involved in, he turns up. He's still out there, going. Probably not at the moment, but like I've seen him in New York, I've seen him in London, he's come out to Australia, so he still gets around, and I guess he just loves being the OG of G-Shock.
The OG G-Shock app. You've mentioned you own a bunch of G-Shock watches. What's the most iconic or prized piece in your collection?
I love the gold medal. I don't know if it's called the 5600.
The full metal one.
Yeah, the full.
The full metal, jacket or something.
No, this is the one they put out a couple of years ago, where they remade the 5600 but did it out of metal. Super heavy, and
Yeah.
I've got the original, but I always saw it was a very heavy watch. So I mean, I think in the watch business, sometimes the heavier it is, there's a sort of a sense of quality and um, um, price point that comes with that. So that's a really nice piece to have. But yeah, aside from that, I think my redhead pin up from the sort of heavy metal series is my favorite, because that was a watch that I looked for a long, long time. And I, as a collector, it's a real dilemma. If you do find what you're waiting for, and you might have been looking for 5 or 10 years, and it comes in and it's more than you would ever pay normally, then do you pull the trigger, or do you wait? You might wait another 10 years for it to turn up. I've seen it a few times on eBay and other places. And if you go to Japan, there's quite a lot of places that, and the internet in Japan is quite hard to decipher. It's hard to buy stuff. So going there is like still the best. But yeah, when I got obsessed with all those metal series, I sort of wanted to get them all, and I realized, I have all these 90s magazines that G-Shock put out and other people put out. And the only way to sort of try and figure out what was sold is to have those original source material and try and tick them off as you get them all. But there's so many. I mean, I think I've done an exhibition a couple of times with them. I ended up with something like close to 300.
Wow.
Which I didn't even know I had, because I would just buy them and look at them for a while, then put them in this box. And then I realized I had a bit of a problem. Like any collector, you go, oh, I've got the gold one. Now I need the one with the black face, or whatever it is. I got the Ant-Man with the gold. Now I need the other one. And there's just so many good ones out there. And like I said, they're not exorbitant. It's super accessible. They're indestructible. I don't think I've ever had one stop working. The worst that can happen is the battery runs out and the strap just starts to turn a bit. Sometimes that happens. But when you have so many, I'll give you a tip to young players: turn the alarms off, because sometimes it'll be like 5 a.m. and there's 100 of them in the box, and you go, one of them just turned the alarm just came on. So I had to put the box somewhere out of my room. So, and then, at different times of the day, they'd all be going off at different times. So yeah, turn the alarms off. Sometimes it takes a bit to figure out how to actually do that.
I still have an alarm that goes off from a G-Shock I got when I was like 17. So, 12 years ago now, 13 years ago. I've never changed the battery, but I just hear it somewhere throughout the house.
Yeah, I think over time they'll get quieter and quieter, then it'll start to go, make this weird thing, and then finally give up the ghost. But they are incredibly durable. And one of the coolest things now of all those metal series watches is there's they charge a lot of money for it, but they remake or they 3D print all the plastic. It's not a full bezel like a 6900, but there's this sort of thing that locks in and protects the metal.
That's
And
cool.
you can put like fluorescent orange on it or white, and you can totally change the identity of the watch. And I'd love to get into that, but I almost feel like I could figure out how to do it myself. I've got a couple that have sort of just chipped a bit. The plastic is the weakness. But when you freshen it up with a new piece of plastic, I mean, they look really good.
Yeah, amazing. Well, does your love for watches extend beyond G-Shock? Do you collect anything else, or is it just sort of the G-Shocks?
I've got quite a few Seiko dive watches. In fact,
Mhm.
I just got the new Prospex today. Um,
Very cool.
I'm a bit of an opportunist, so I get kind of obsessed with it, and then I wait. The price, will go down. Then you'll see someone who's desperate. So this one came from Hong Kong, and it took about 8 weeks to arrive. I think I might have bought it just for Christmas. Um, Again, just come back to the design and the gold. The gold tuner was one that I spent ages waiting for. The
Yeah,
prices on those is a little bit crazy, but I ended up getting it for I think 700 or 800 US, which was a bit of a steal. And it's a really beautiful watch. It's not scratched or clapped out. A lot of the dive watches, if they've been used, they've had a pretty torturous life. So you can redo the bezel and the face, but it's a lot of trouble to go to. So all these things, they're all, I hate to use the word rabbit hole, but once you go down it, you see one and then you see the other one that's really nice. And then you see the really good one and you go, now we're into the $1,000 or the 2,000 mark. And that's when I sort of check myself. But, again, I'm endlessly fascinated by what designers have been able to do with this really small surface. And in G-Shock's case, the technology that they've been able to cram into such a tiny mechanism.
yeah, absolutely. So, Woody, we've taken up enough of your time. I think it's we should probably wrap this up. I do want to ask you two final questions. I want to get your recommendations. Typically, we'll ask like people what they've been watching on Netflix, all that sort of stuff. With you, I want to be a bit more targeted. I want to ask for anyone listening, what would you recommend is the best starter sneaker for someone that wants to get into, or maybe the best place to like start collecting sneakers or get into sneaker culture?
Well, the best place to get into it is by reading the Sneaker Freaker blog and socials.
Oh,
So that will give you all the daily updates and everything that's sort of happening. I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, how does someone get into it? I've had a lot of parents bring their children to me recently and said,
yeah.
"My son really wants to become a reseller. Can you tell him how to do it?" And of course, it's a little bit hard to answer that question.
It's pretty overwhelming though. Like just jumping into Sneaker Freak. Like if I hit like, where do I start? Like, is it your
Mm.
book or is it like a idiot's guide to coolsneakers.com?
Well, I mean, I think the best place to start, really, just in terms of knowledge, is the Ultimate Sneaker Book. I had to sort of plug something I've sort of made, but
Of
it is like
course, of course.
700 pages of knowledge. But that gives you, for example, or a guide to all the Air Max shoes. It gives you a guide to every Jordan. So building up your knowledge to anything is fundamental to understanding. And then beyond the knowledge of actual shoes or watches or whatever it is, then you have to understand the hustle. So where can you get shoes from and how much can you sell them for? Because I've seen a lot of kids get ripped off. They come in, they're just super naive, and they'll buy stuff up and then expecting to be able to, someone's told them they can double or triple their money. So we have an event that we hold twice a year, well, up until last year, called the Sneaker Freaker Swap Meet. And I've seen kids get younger and younger. We had a kid who was 15 bring down $5,000 cash, just waving it around, buying shoes like crazy. Um, as a parent, it's quite hard to
Yikes.
understand and get your head around it. Who gave him? Apparently, his parents gave him the money. But
Wow.
that of course, when you're that age, you're just easily
Well, you're an idiot.
ripped off.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was an
So
idiot when I was 15.
yeah, exactly. But also, why aren't they chasing girls and trying to get a car for the first time or something? Instead,
First you get
I
the
mean, I
shoes.
understand they're trying to turn $5,000 into 10, but it ain't that easy. So you have to really know what you're buying. And if you talk to resellers that are really into it, they know what the market is for a size 6 in a shoe and a size 13 because they're totally different. And
Amazing.
they are worth different amounts of money to different markets. New Balance shoes, one insight I can give you is that when we do a New Balance collaboration, we produce a lot more 13s because there are a lot of guys with big feet that like New Balance. So maybe it comes
Yeah,
back to
sure.
that dad shoe thing. But yeah, I would suggest don't do anything for a year until you've figured out what's going on.
Mate, that's good advice. That for anything, that is really good advice. One last one. So, what should people, maybe we've got our heads around it, we're comfortable in the space. What should we be looking out for this year in terms of like trends or any upcoming, releases to, get the bots onto?
Yeah, this year's interesting. I mean, the Jordan 1s sort of maybe had it run its course, but I think the Dunk as well maybe is coming to the end of its cycle. The fashion obsession with brands is sort of coming to an end. Like I said, Vuitton and Nike sort of like the last great piece of that puzzle. The big chunky shoes sort of had its day as well. So there's a lot of things that are transitioning out. The world's not ready for Stan Smith or Superstar to come back. So it's a bit of an open field this year. And I think, I think what will be really strong this year is anything in the outdoors space. So that's from proper brands in that realm, but also you'll see a lot of brands using like ACG style color combinations. So purple, orange, and moss green, for example. So I expect that to be really strong, and probably certain models. I would say the Moab might come back this year, which is a classic Nike shoe. Those things sort of like the natural evolution. When everything's been done, we just go back to the start. It resets, and I think hiking's probably the one that'll take off this year.
Amazing. That's a great answer. Well, Woody, thank you so much for joining us. We'll do our best to link everything up that you've mentioned, and we'll certainly link up a copy of your book. And I think now that we've had you on, it's a tax deduction for us to buy a couple of copies for ourselves, Felix.
Get it from Amazon. It's free shipping. If it weighs nearly 5 kilos, so if you order it from somewhere, you don't want to pay $100 for it to be shipped to you. So yeah,
I'm happy making Amazon.
From Amazon. I've got Amazon Prime as well, so it's perfect.
There you go. That's perfect. It's a perfect combination for that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We'll link everything up. We'll link up socials. We really appreciate you taking the time.
All right, keep your laces loose, guys.
Andy, that was a really fascinating chat. Like, as someone that's not just into Casio and vaguely into shoes, but also someone that sort of works in that digital space, he's had such a phenomenal career and done some amazing things. So, really great to for him to chat to us and be so generous with his time. Thank you so much, Simon Wood. Thank you, G-Shock Australia. Who else do we need to thank, Andy Green?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to Simon again, because that was an amazing chat, and I love that he's made it sort of this far and had that much success off his personality. Like, it's very obvious he hasn't sort of changed or tried to be anything that he's not to get things done. He's just done
it the right way.
Yeah, he's done it the right way, and to be honest, what a man to chat to. We need to thank Major Tom Media for putting the show together, as always. Thank you to everyone that listened. If you want to email us, otthepodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to hit us on the socials, ot.podcast is our Instagram handle for those DMs. Felix,
and
I think we're done.
Don't forget to review us, to like us, to subscribe, all that stuff.
Yes.
We should be plugging those Apple reviews more, but well, we're pretty great.
Every episode, let's just do it from now on.
Nice. All right. Well, we'll do that.
And thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
See you next time.